Hello and welcome to a special episode of Adobe Creative Cloud TV. My name is Terry White, and in this special episode, we celebrate Photoshop's 25th anniversary. That's right, as of today, Photoshop turns 25. It was first released on February 19th, 1990. So 25 years ago, we saw version 1.0. And I thought, what better way to celebrate Photoshop than to really help people understand what we had back then versus what we have now. For example, here I have the latest version, Photoshop CC for 2014 release, up on my screen with all the updates and ready to go. And I can do just about anything. I can do whatever my creative mind allows me to think up. If I can think it up, I can pretty much do it in Photoshop with all the magic that's been added over the years. But many of you, in many cases, are either younger than Photoshop, meaning you're under 25 or around 25, or maybe you're older than 25, but you were a kid when Photoshop came out. So that means you probably started with a much later version than 1.0. Maybe it was version 5, 5.5, 6, 7, or even the CS versions. So with that said, I thought, let's not do a tutorial on Photoshop CC. Let's do a Photoshop tutorial with Photoshop 1.0. So here's what we're going to do. We're just going to go up. We're going to quit Photoshop. And if you were back, and we're going to take a little time travel trip here. If you were back in 1990, this is what you would be running Photoshop on. You'd either be running it on what we called a Mac Classic, Mac Plus, an SE, something of that nature back then, with its built-in 9-inch monochrome display. Or perhaps you graduated to a LC, a Mac 2, or something of that nature that you could have a color display on. In either case, you were running Photoshop on hardware that wasn't as good as your smartphone is today. Wasn't as powerful as your smartphone is today. So with that said, how do I run Photoshop? I don't have one of these old machines with me today. Next best thing. I've got an emulator. Let's go ahead and pull it over. Now I'm going to pull it over from a different display with a different resolution, so I might get some weird display color issues here. I'm just going to wipe through them, kind of clean the screen here, and there we go. All right, so here we are in the old Mac OS. As a matter of fact, which version of Mac OS is this? Let's take a look. We go on about this Macintosh. It is System 7.53. System 7. Not Mac OS 10.7. This is pre-Mac OS 10. And Mac OS 10 has already had 11 releases. So it's, this is ancient hardware and ancient software back in the 90s. And as you can see, I had a whopping 64 megs or 65 megs of RAM back then. Actually counted as 64. So this is just unheard of in today's market. Let's go ahead and close this and let's launch Photoshop 1.0. And right before we launch it, let me point out one thing, is that Photoshop 1.0 shipped on a floppy disk, those little cartridges that went inside your computer, and it shipped on a 800K disk, 800K disk. It was that small. So let's go ahead and double click and launch Photoshop 1.0. And let's go ahead and open up an image, and then we'll take a quick perusal of the interface, and we'll do a little Photoshop work. I'm going to go ahead and open up, and this image that I'm opening up actually has some historic value. This is the image, it's called Jennifer in Paradise, that Thomas Knoll, one of the inventors of Photoshop, Thomas and John Knoll, that Thomas used to show Photoshop to Adobe. In other words, he brought it in the computer, opened up this image, and started working on it to show the power of Photoshop. And this image, Jennifer, this is, I believe, his girlfriend at the time, became his wife, and he thought, well, let's make it personal, let's make it about an image that I took, and we can show what we can do with it. Now, of course, I can't, show exactly what he did because I wasn't there, but I heard from rumors and heard from my buddy Russell Brown, some of the things that he showed that wowed them back then, and let's go ahead and take a look at some of those things. First and foremost, if you look at the interface, if you've been using Photoshop, chances are you recognize these tools. You have your elliptical selection tools, elliptical, rectangular marquee, lasso, magic wand, grabber hand, magnifying tool, crop tool, text tool, paint bucket for filling, your gradient tool, line tool, eyedropper, eraser, pencil, the spray tool, the paintbrush, the not the magic wand, but the clone stamp tool, the smudge tool, blur, and sharpen. Your foreground and background colors were not offset like they are now. They're just one square on top of another. And then your various presentation mode for the windows. Now, if we go up to our file menu, file was pretty much the way you would expect. Open files, save files, close files. If you were fortunate enough to have a scanner back then, which was the primary way to get images into Photoshop since there were no consumer digital cameras back then, you would use the acquire module, and you would use something called Twain, most likely to attach to your scanner and bring it in, if you were fortunate enough to own a scanner. Under the edit menu, the standard system things like cut, copy, paste, fill, crop, define a brush and define a pattern, even back in those days, some paste controls, and this is where you'd set your Photoshop preferences. Under the mode menu, you have your various modes. And I want to point out that even Photoshop 1.0 had CMYK. And this is probably one of the reasons why Photoshop took off in publishing, because it enabled people to do color separations for offset printing on their computer. In other words, without having to send them out or have it done in a high-end facility, you could actually do your own color separations if you were a print shop. So that pretty much would just about pay for Photoshop in a computer right then and there. You had channel support, and let's go into the image menu, your image map support, your adjustments, levels, brightness, contrast, color saturation, or color balance, hue and saturation. No curves. There were no curves back then. If anything, you used the map arbitrary as your curve method. You had filters. Yes, there were filters back then in Photoshop. Very few and very rudimentary filters, but you had filters, you had the calculation models, you had your flip and rotate controls, your resize and resample, trapping, again another color or printing feature, your various selection tools and methods. But wait, where are the panels? Where are all the palettes and things that normally are around Photoshop? Well, we did have palettes back then. We had two. We had the palette, which was basically your colors, and we had brushes. That's it. And this was your brushes panel back then. That's it. That's all you had. So I can close these because I'm sure I can bring them up anytime I need them. And now let's go ahead and take a look at what we can do with this image. I'm going to do a couple basic things to kind of commemorate what was done in the initial showing of Photoshop back then, and then I'll get into another example with another set of images for some compositing. But just back then, things that I'm about to do were just unheard of. So for example, making a selection around just Jennifer. Well, today you have all kinds of tools and methods and masking to do it. Back then, you might start with something like the magic wand or lasso. And I'm just going to go ahead and make just a loose selection around her. And we'll keep it very loose. And now that I've made this selection, of course, I don't want it to be hard-edged. And that was kind of the magic of Photoshop 1.0, is that I did have the ability to go up to the select menu, come down to feather, and feather that selection, let's say by 10 pixels. Now that I've feathered the selection, let's go ahead, and normally I would just go ahead and grab this, hold down my Option key, and move her over, make a copy that way. But in my emulator, the thing I'm running this all in, the Option key is not acting right in Photoshop. So yes, Photoshop did support the Option key for a lot of things, or Alt key back then for a lot of things. It's just I can't do it today. So instead, what I'm going to do is go ahead and go up to my Edit menu, Copy. And of course I could do this from the keyboard, paste, and that will put a copy of Jennifer. And notice I didn't have to switch to a selection tool. There was no selection tool back then. It's just you turn into a selection tool whenever you were in the middle of the selection. And we'll go ahead and move her over. Oh, wait, where is she? There's no preview back then. You were moving over an outline until you let go, and that's when you'd see her. Now, of course, at this point, people in the room were freaking out. The fact that you could even select something and copy pixels and move them over like that. But let's take it up a notch. Let's go into our image menu. Let's flip this image horizontally, and let's get it just about where we want it to be. Move it down a little bit, because once you deselect, like I accidentally just did just then, you're done. Meaning, yeah, you could go up to edit and undo the deselect, and you could move her around again. But once you lock in, once you commit and do something else, there is no more undo. Meaning you have one level of undo. It will always undo the last thing you did, and that's it. No history panel, nothing like that. So once I deselect and I do anything else, those pixels are now permanent. So what people spent a lot of their time doing back then is making sure they saved on a regular basis, so that if they did make 2 mistakes in a row or 2 things in a row and they kind of wanted to go back, they could always revert back to the last save. So now I'm going to go in and just making any kind of other adjustment. So for example, if I go in and just simply use the magic wand and kind of select this mountain range over here, now I could undo that, but it only undid the last little selection I made. So that's it, my one undo. She's there permanently now. There's no getting her back. There's no taking her and moving her over, because there were no layers back then. Layers didn't come out until 3.0. So no layers in 1.0, no layers in 2.0, no layers in 2.5. We didn't get layers until 3. And of course, layers were, you know, oh my God. So let's go in and let's make an adjustment while we've got this selected. I want to do a levels adjustment. And if I remember my keyboard shortcuts, Command L, yep, that brings up levels just like it does today. And I want to be able to see what I'm doing. Let's move this over. And let's go ahead and just make a select. Oh, well, I'm lightening this up, but I don't see anything. That's right. What we take for granted in preview in most of our operations in Photoshop, if you were lucky, you had a preview button. You could click preview and see what you just did, make another adjustment, click preview and see what you just did. If you were lucky, if there was no preview button, you'd have to click OK and use up one of your undo, because that's it. You can only undo it and then redo it and start over again. So once I click OK, and then once I deselect, that's done, permanent. So you can kind of see where Photoshop started. Revolutionary at the time, but oh my God, the things we can do now compared to this are just phenomenal. One more thing is that I believe Thomas did show the clone stamp tool, and maybe clone the cloud or maybe clone Jennifer over, but just the fact that you could do cloning back then, that was it. I think Russell Brown was quoted as saying, that's when I ran into John Warnock's office, or wanted to run into John Warnock's office and say, buy this now, because he had never seen anything like this before on a computer back in 1990. All right, so let's close this. We had enough fun with Jennifer in Paradise. And again, that has the historic value of that being the first image that Photoshop was used to do a demo with. Let's not save it. And now what I want to do is I want to open up one of the other images I happen to have here on the desktop. So let's go to File and Open. Matter of fact, I want to open that Statue of Liberty JPEG right there. Oh, wait. The JPEG is not in the list. Huh. Wonder why Photoshop doesn't see it. Oh, I remember. There was no JPEG format in 1990. JPEG didn't come out for 2 more years, till 1992. So there was no Joint Photographic Experts Group, which is what JPEG stands for, format when Photoshop came out. So the reason it doesn't see a JPEG is because JPEG hadn't been invented yet. All right, so let's go in and let's open up the Statue of Liberty TIFF, which we can open. So we'll open up this TIFF file and we'll let's zoom it out, or actually zoom into it, I should say. And we'll make it nice and big, and let's go ahead and use that magic wand one more time, and we'll make a selection. And we'll hold down our Shift key and we'll make another selection, another selection, another selection. Again, I could use my lasso, I could use other tools, I could change the tolerance on this to do a better job or a faster job, but you get the idea. These were the pain points we had back in those days of working with Photoshop just to get the most simple things done. I think I missed a spot up there. Oops, oops, undo. I want to add that in. And I'm adding in too much. All right, I'm just going to let it go for now. All right, next thing I want to do is I want to open up another image. I could zoom in and work on that some more, but it's not worth it. Let's go ahead and open up another image. And I want to open up the US Flag Tiff file. And yes, you could have multiple images open. Oh my God, you could have two things open at the same time. Yes, you could have multiple images open if you had enough RAM. And you can see that nice, fast refresh there. Let's go in and do a select all. Copy from the clip or from the command key. Let's go ahead and close the flag. And let's come back to the Statue of Liberty. Did I deselect? I might have. Oh, I deselected by mistake. Darn it. All right. Oh, no. Out of memory. There we go. No. Okay, we're there. I got it back. All right. Edit. Paste into. And there's our image. Now, of course, again, I didn't do a great job selecting right in here, but we paste our image. Now, at this point, what can I do? I can move it around, just like you would today. I can apply other adjustments, and this is kind of how you had to think about Photoshop. You had to think in a way of, am I done? Is there anything else I want to do? Because deselecting is kind of death. You're committing to it at that point. So once you deselect, I want to make the flag a little bit more dramatic. Once you deselect, in other words, look around, make sure it looks the way you want it to look, because once you deselect, you're committing to it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and deselect, and I want to do one more thing just for fun. I want to work with text. I want to add the word liberty across this. So there's a type tool. There always has been since day one. But here's the thing about the type tool. Let's click it. Let's type in our text. You didn't type on the canvas. You actually typed into a box. Liberty. And you picked your fonts. And of course now, my limited font list is because I didn't install any extra fonts in my emulator. But you would have whatever fonts you installed. You could have multiple fonts back then. But you were guessing at this point. You're guessing on the size. I don't know. I can't see it. Maybe 60 point is big enough. You're guessing on leading, spacing, bold. You have no idea what this is going to look like until you click OK. It gets better. Once you click OK, you have a text selection. So you have a fill of pixels. At this point, you could pick maybe a different color. I don't know. Let's grab the eyedropper. Let's grab the red. And maybe let's fill that with that color. I think that might work. And you could move it around. If I go back to my selection tool maybe. Yeah, I can pick it up. I can move it around. But again, once I put it where I want or where I think I want it, and I deselect, it's pixels burned into that image now. No layers, no editable text, no vector text. Your text was the same resolution as your image. Low resolution image, low resolution bitmap text. And if you had a typo, oh well, start over. Because you lost or undo, you deselected. So that was how much better you had to be at Photoshop back then, because there wasn't much room for mistakes, or you'd be doing a lot of things over and over again. Now at this point, I could save this. And you would think, well, you're going to save it as a Photoshop file to keep all your layers? Well, there are no layers. So save it as whatever you want. And again, JPEG's not a choice because there was no JPEG back then. I can save it as a Photoshop file, an EPS file. PIC file was very popular back in the Mac days back then. Not camera raw. This is raw data, raw form, totally different raw format. It has nothing to do with camera raw. Target file, and because camera raw wasn't invented yet, because there were no cameras back then that shot raw. So camera raw didn't come out until Photoshop 7. And TIFF, of course. And ThunderScan, I had one of those. That was the little scanner you put on your image writer that gave you a really crappy scan, but you were the coolest person in the world. It took you an hour, but you had a scan of your photo. Wow, we've come a long way since these days of Photoshop. I'm going to just change the name of this, and we'll call it Flag. And we'll save it to the desktop. Click Click OK. And we can close it. And that's Photoshop 1.0. That's what we contended with back in those days, guys. So thanks again for watching. Thanks for being a Photoshop user, a Photoshop customer. Thanks for following me. Thanks for watching my videos. Today's a great day in the history of Photoshop. It's 25th anniversary. I can only imagine what Photoshop will be in 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 more years from now. It's amazing today, and it's only going to keep getting better. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one. Happy Photoshop.